All right, Algebra, Mr. Johnson here. We are going to review solving equations two different ways, and we are going to solve two separate equations. So at this point, what I want you to do is make sure you pause and copy down this first equation. We are going to solve it by backtracking and then by basic moves. So go ahead and copy this down to give yourself some time here and pause the video. All right. So first we're going to solve this by backtracking. Now remember, with backtracking, what we want to focus on is what happens to the variable. So if we start with x, the first thing in this equation that happens to x right here is that it is subtracted by 8. Then that group of x minus 8, that quantity, is multiplied by 3. And finally, we add 5 to get negative 25. Now to backtrack, we are going to undo these operations in reverse order. So if I want to undo adding 5, I will subtract 5 to get negative 30. Instead of multiplying by 3, I will divide by 3 to get negative 10. And instead of subtracting 8, I'm going to add 8, and I get an answer of negative 2. So we are left with x equaling negative 2. Now let's go ahead and try that with basic moves and see if we get the same answer. Now again, we are undoing the operations that happen to x in reverse order. And remember, we subtracted 8, multiplied by 3, added 5 to get negative 25. So we are going to want to undo those. So I'm going to start by subtracting 5 from both sides. That's going to give me 3 times the quantity of x minus 8 equals negative 30. Now at this point, I can continue undoing those operations and undo the multiplying by 3 and divide everything by 3. It would look like this if I divided by 3. So I can, 3 divided by 3 is 1, and then I would just have that x minus 8 equals negative 10. Now some of you might consider distributing instead of dividing by 3. And if we distribute, we would get 3x minus 24 equals negative 30. And then from there, your basic moves would just be slightly different. You would add 24 and divide by 3. But if I was going with the basic moves of following these orders of operations that I did when I backtracked, the last step here would be to add 8 on both sides, and I get that x equals negative 2, which is exactly what I had before. Had I gone the other route, and maybe even from the beginning distributed and combined my like terms, I would still get 3x equaling negative 6, divide both sides by 3, and x would be negative 2. So no matter how I do this, basic moves, backtracking, basic moves with different steps, I get that x is negative 2. All right, here is the second equation, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pause and copy this down. All right, so as I look at this equation, the funny thing I see is this variable shows up twice, right? So the variable is there 2 times, which means that I can't really backtrack it that easily. Because if I were to start with x right now, is the first thing subtracting 4, or is it multiplying by 6? And where are those going to combine? So I think that I'm not able to backtrack yet. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and simplify this left side and combine our like terms. And this will help me to be able to backtrack or solve with basic moves. So I'm going to look only at that left side of the equation, and I'm going to do everything I can to make that look a little bit more simplified. All right, that is always going to be a goal of ours, is to simplify everything we can on both sides as much as possible. So I'm going to start by going to distribute that negative 2. That leaves me with negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. Parentheses are gone. I have my plus 6x equals 14. Now I notice I've got negative 2x and positive 6x, so I can combine those to get 4x, positive 4x, plus 8 equals 14. At this point, now I can either backtrack or finish off with basic moves. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of both here. If I were to backtrack, it looks like I multiply by 4 first, and then add 8, and I get 14. So I'm going to undo that. We're going to subtract 8. That gives me 6. And divide by 4. Well, 6 isn't really divisible by 4 nicely, so I'm going to get that x equals 6 over 4. Of course, we would reduce that and get that x is 3/2. Had I gone the basic moves route, once I got that simplified left side, I would do the exact same operations. I'm going to start by subtracting 8 on both sides. 4x is equal to 6. Divide both sides by 4. X equals 6 over 4, or reduced 3 halves. All right. So again, some key things here. Backtracking is great once you have everything simplified. So try and simplify each side as much as possible if necessary before backtracking or using basic moves. And then also with basic moves, sometimes you have options, right? You can distribute or you can decide to divide like we did here. Here we divided, here we distributed. So that is up to you. Remember, you can always substitute your value back in to check your answer. Now you're going to get a chance to move on. Thanks.